We've had Deputy Cullinan. We'll take Deputy Broughan, Deputy Boyd Barrett. Deputy Broughan.
Thanks, Ken. Well, obviously there was a very lengthy discussion at the budgetary committee about the 120 million. I think there was grave dissatisfaction. I wasn't able to stay for the end of your contribution, Minister. There was grave dissatisfaction on exactly how you were going to provide this 120 million. There was lengthy discussion by Deputy Cullinan and Deputy Pearse Doherty about savings and efficiencies, but you didn't really shed any light on it. And I mean, while we welcome the process of the restoration of the savage cuts since 2009, that's a step forward. Like you seem to be saying, if you hadn't have acted, you would have had much more expenditure later in the year on foot of Labour Court. I just wanted to ask, and I know it's a kind of similar question, did you seek any advice from the new Public Sector Pay Commission? Was that involved in any way in the decision? Thanks, Ken.
We'll take the questions, Minister, if that's okay.
Do you want me to respond back to Deputy Broughan?
It's easier that we take all the questions. Deputy Boyd Barrett, and no point duplicating
your discussion, Minister. You see, the point is, we don't accept that you have to rob Peter to pay Paul. We believe that workers are entitled to pay restoration, indeed in excess of the €1,000 you're talking about, but we don't believe that that money should be taken from services. And what we want is a commitment that services that are starved of funding will not be his for this. And when you ask, well, where else can you get the money? Minister, we're tired of telling you. The envelope, your envelope, is too small, it isn't adequate, because you resist consistently our appeals to you to look elsewhere for extra revenue. By making the vulture funds pay their taxes, by making Apple pay their taxes, by introducing financial transaction tax, by making the landlords pay a bit more tax, by taxing the higher incomes, there's plenty of money we could get to redistribute some of the wealth in this country in a fair way that would allow us to both fund our public services and give public sector workers and other workers decent pay levels. That's the point.
Just deal with Deputy Broughan first. Did I seek the input from the Public Service Pay Commission in relation to this matter? The answer to that question is I did not. The reason why I did not is the terms of reference for the Public Service Pay Commission exclusively refer to the aftermath and the potential for a replacement to the Lansdowne Road Agreement. So it would not have been appropriate to ask their view in relation to it. In relation to your analysis of why I did it, there is much truth in the point you have made. The concern that I had, and it was a very substantial one, is that if the government across this year found itself in a position that we had to deal with a set of competing sectoral pay claims, that would have completely undermined the plans that we have for public pay for the second half of this year, undermined our clarity regarding what that cost was, and that would have had extremely serious consequences on service delivery. In relation to the point that Deputy Boyd Barrett put to me there, I mean, where we differ, Deputy, is I believe that the measures that you were talking about that would raise revenue, and in fairness to you, you have been rare in always sketching out the ways in which you would raise that money. I believe all of them would have negative consequences, which in turn would affect the performance of our economy, jobs in our economy and our ability to pay for public services. And even just in the point that you've made there in relation to Apple, nowhere in your words did I hear you make reference to the fact that Apple employs thousands of people here in our country. In relation to the points that you made there on financial services, nowhere in your points did I hear you say there are tens of thousands of people employed in our state in financial services, that multinational investment is a core part of how we provide employment across our state. So there are alternatives, but it's my belief that implementing the measures you're talking about would undermine the very kind of economy and revenue growth that we need to pay for the public services that I want to see improved too.
Deputy Cullinan.
Minister, you have to act yourself in a manner that you would expect the opposition to act as well. If I was to come into this House and say to you, Minister, I have a proposal that will cost €120 million, and you say to me, how, Deputy Cullinan, are you proposing I pay for it? And I say, well, take it out of general savings and efficiencies, I and Deputy Boyd Barrett and Deputy Broughan would be laughed out of this chamber. That's the reality, Minister. So we have to line item and cost every single proposal down to the cent that we propose, and we do. You seem to think that you can operate in a different set of circumstances, waltz in, say here's a cost of 120 million, and leaving aside the rights and wrongs of it, because I agree with the pay restoration, it's about process and it's about making sure that you are accountable. And you still have not given us one line item of how 1 cent will be achieved, apart from general broad brush references to savings and efficiencies. And that, with respect, Minister, is simply not good enough. It is not appropriate to treat us in this way, to treat the Oireachtas in this way, to treat the sectoral committee, which has responsibility for budget oversight, in that way. So please, Minister, come back with absolute line-item savings and do what you ask us to do on this side of the House.
Minister, will I take all the questions and then come back to you, I think. Deputy Broughan.
Thanks. Well, just to follow on, Deputy Cullinan, it is quite clear that you seem to feel you have a package of a quantum of savings and efficiencies that enable you to do this, but you're not giving us. We have responsibility. If you're in opposition, I think, and we were coming in with a proposal like this, which we agree with obviously the proposal, but we still want to know how exactly you're going to do it. I mean, for example, are you relying on, despite what you're saying, are you going to rely again on maybe tax buoyancy? That the figures that we hope that the tax will be ahead of target as the year develops, and that will give you the scope. And I mean, have you factored in how this will impact on overall spending throughout the year and indeed into the following years? I mean, we do have issues which again we raised with you at the committee, issues like inflation, increasing numbers rightly in the public service. So have you assessed all of that? Can you give us some definite, concrete answers, Minister?
Deputy John Curran.
Minister, my apologies for being late, but I just want to make the point that the groupings weren't circulated in advance, or if they were, we certainly didn't get them, so my apologies for that. I want to pick up on the point that colleagues have made already. In October, Budget 2017 was delivered. In that budget, there was already, in terms of the tax and the savings, there was already a figure included for efficiencies, for counter-fraud and anti-fraud, etc. and so forth. You will remember at the time there was some discussion about the social welfare payments would only kick in March, and I think the figure to bring them all forward to the beginning of the year at the time was something like 60 million. So we've had this debate, and in the month of October and November there was no additional funding, no additional savings, no additional efficiencies available, and all of a sudden they become available. Now, I agree with the principle of what you're doing, but like colleagues on the right, I do not. You're on my right, as we sit. Sorry, I agree with my. I agree with what you're trying to do, Minister. But what I don't agree, and what is not fair to members in this House, is the ambiguous way where these figures are being produced.
Thank you, Deputy.
In the sense they are additional savings on top of savings and compliance issues that had already been identified in Budget 2017 back in October. The 60 million which wasn't available to bring forward the social welfare payments to the beginning of January, and now there's 120 million for this initiative. It's the identification of the detail, where those funds are coming from. That's the issue that colleagues have, and the clarity required. Sorry, Councillor, I had a lot of making up to do.
Let's be clear, Minister. I want to see pay restoration and a hell of a lot more of it. I was talking to some of the service officers in here, and they are just nearly crying with some of the pay levels they have to put up with, right? So they need this pay. But what I don't like, and it was implicit in what you said, is that we will essentially, it's one or the other. It's services that are cash-starved or it's pay. And we don't accept that. So we want the details, Minister, which you would expect of us, as Billy Cullinan said. We have been, it's not just hypothetical, we have been laughed at and ridiculed by you when we put forward other tax revenue raising proposals saying that's nonsense, we want costings, it'll destroy the economy and so on. You insist on detail, and yet here you come forward and you don't tell us where the detail, you don't give us the detail, and therefore we fear that it's about robbing Peter to pay Paul. So I think you have an obligation to tell us where the money is coming from.
Minister, to conclude. Yes.
Thank you, Councillor. 3 points. Number one, I have outlined, since I made this announcement, that I will put in place the measures and decisions to make sure that services are not affected as a result of doing this. Number two, I welcome the fact that all deputies have stood up and agreed with the decision that I made, agreed that this was an appropriate response back to the matter that developed in the aftermath of the Labour Court recommendation. Number three, I have said that in line with the commitments that I have to the Oireachtas across 2017, in the publication of the work that is necessary in advance of Budget 2018, I will identify the choices that I will take to deliver this funding while not reducing service commitments that we have to citizens. I just want to conclude with the point that Deputy Curran put to me there, and I just remind Deputy Curran that actually this issue developed in the aftermath of the budget in October. The Labour Court recommendation, the consequences of this for the Gardaí, happened after this budget was presented to the House. And Deputy, if I had been in a position where I had stood up in front of the House and presented higher figures for public pay than were agreed inside the Lansdowne Road Agreement, I would then be asked by your good self and by other colleagues why we're changing assumptions that we have in relation to public pay for the Lansdowne Road Agreement and why we're asking the House to sanction people to be paid more. That would not have been the appropriate thing to do then. And as I said, Ceann Comhairle, across this year, as we move through the management of a budget of €58 billion, I will identify how I will deliver the commitments that I've laid out.
Thank you, Minister. Question number 9 is in the name of Deputy Thomas Broughan. Deputy Broughan to introduce.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Well, Minister, I think we had an earlier discussion on the comprehensive spending review, which I think is the third maybe such review in our recent economic history. You referred, I think, earlier on, interestingly, to rolling selective reviews, and I just wonder what exactly that involves. We note, for example, a report that became public recently from the Department of Social Protection in relation to the free travel scheme, and I just wondered, which upset a lot of our constituents deeply, and is that the type of thing that will be happening in these rolling reviews?
Minister.
Well, I outlined earlier on, Deputy, the way in which we look to conduct this work. Why it is a rolling review is that it would not be possible within a single year to review in the level of detail that I want the entirety of all government expenditure. It's over €58 billion. Secondly, the way in which we will do it is we will identify a third of government expenditure per year. That's the reason why I refer to it as a rolling review, because I'll anticipate that it will take around 3.5 years to complete this work. And then finally, Deputy, where it differs very much from previous spending reviews that you have referred to in our recent economic history, is the objective of those reviews was to reduce the amount of government expenditure. That is not an explicit or an implicit objective of this. What I'm looking to do is, inside agreed expenditure ceilings, find out if there are better ways in which policy objectives that government ministers are looking to deliver could be achieved. And in that respect, therefore, it differs very significantly from spending reviews that have been undertaken by the previous government over recent years.
Point. I mean, I'm glad to hear that it's not a continuation of previous reviews, which are aimed at cutting expenditure of vital services, which unfortunately your government shamefully did, I think, since 2011. But just to ask, I mean, to what extent I mentioned that report in the Department of Social Protection, are all departments carrying out reports, therefore, on certain programmes? Would you nominate which programmes you want to hear back? For example, the free travel scheme, other schemes, the clothing grants, for example, in the Department of Social Protection, all of these type of schemes. Do you decide that? Do ministers then have to carry it out? Who actually makes that decision? And in relation just to inflationary pressures, I mean, how is that taken into account? And also, in particular, in relation to new services and innovative new services, we've spoken at the committee and here about obviously important new measures that a government could take, but to what extent, is that built into the rolling review as well?
Firstly, Minister Varadkar and Minister Ross have made very clear that there will be no change in relation to the availability of the free travel scheme. The report that gave rise to this debate was one that was put in place many, many years ago. We did not change that scheme at the very depth of the economic difficulty the country faced. It will not be changed now. In relation to the points that you put to me, Deputy, how will the policy area be agreed? It will be mutually agreed between myself and the Minister leading the other department. There hasn't been any dissent to date in relation to the selection of us, so we haven't had to get to a point of enforcing the selection of a particular policy area. There has been a happy meeting of minds in relation to the selection of us. And then in relation to new policies and innovation, I mean, this is the very reason why we are conducting this review, to see are there savings that are possible to identify that will allow new services to be delivered. The Deputy made reference to the fact that expenditure on public services was reduced, and it was in response to the horrific crisis the country was in. But we did exit a bailout programme. We are increasing public expenditure year on year now, but we are looking to do that now in such a way that delivers better public services.
Deputy, to conclude, you're happy enough, Deputy?
Well, just to say, just the one point is, I mean, when you identify in your rolling programme for expenditure reviews, I mean, officials in your department, would you be looking, for example, in particular at programmes where there is, whether from demographic pressures or other pressures, there is massive increases year on year in spending?
That question to me earlier on when you raised the issue of inflation, which I didn't answer, and that's related to demographics. No, we would not be. We're not selecting a particular area in relation to the impact that demographics or inflation might have in that area. In relation to how we deal with that in public services, the area of growth of inflation has a particular effect in relation to social welfare payments. The position on that is it's up to the government of the day to make a decision in relation to the changing of either social welfare payments or, of course, public sector pay. I do not believe it is the right thing to commit to automatic indexation, because we have to respect the ability of a government to make a decision about how to best use taxpayers' money. In relation to demographics, the area in which that is most important is in relation to our primary schools and our secondary schools, and the expenditure ceilings that we have for the coming years do take account of that.
Question number 10 is in the name of